Have you ever felt like no matter how hard you try, life just doesn't make sense? That God's promises seem distant, his blessings delayed, and his guidance unclear. What if I told you that the problem isn't with God? It's with how you've been reading his message all your life. Today, I'm going to show you how misinterpretation has been holding you back and how understanding his true message can completely transform your life. So often, the real problem in our spiritual lives is not that God isn't speaking. It's that we are misinterpreting his message. God's voice has been clear all along, but we approach it with our own biases, fears, and assumptions. We read his word and hear what we want to hear, not what he is actually saying. We see our circumstances through the lens of frustration or disappointment, and suddenly we convince ourselves that God is punishing us, ignoring us, or even abandoning us. But that is a misunderstanding, a misreading of his intent. Think about it. How many times have you prayed for guidance, for clarity, for breakthrough, only to walk away thinking God doesn't care or he is against me because the answer didn't come in the way you expected? That is misinterpretation. It's not God's silence that is the problem. It's our inability to see his message for what it truly is. Many of us have lived our entire lives believing the wrong story about God, and it has kept us bound in fear, guilt, and confusion. Even in the Bible, people misunderstood God all the time. They saw the situations in front of them and immediately assumed God's judgment or rejection. But God's message is never intended to destroy. It is always intended to guide, instruct, and restore. When we misread his intentions, we end up creating a life that is far more stressful and complicated than it needs to be. We begin to live in a state of worry or frustration, thinking we are failing, when in reality, God has been teaching, shaping, and preparing us for something greater. Misinterpretation doesn't just happen with words. It happens with circumstances too. Life throws trials, setbacks, and obstacles at us, and we jump to conclusions about what they mean spiritually. We hear a verse, take it out of context, and apply it incorrectly to our lives. Or we see a door closed and that God is rejecting us, not realizing that he might be redirecting us to a better path. Every misinterpretation builds on the last, and before long, our entire understanding of God's plan is distorted. The truth is that God's message is consistent and unchanging. It is love, it is purpose, it is guidance. But until we stop reading life backwards, until we stop twisting his words to fit our fears, we will continue to misinterpret him. Many of us have developed habits of misinterpreting God's message without even realizing it. And it often starts with the way we perceive life's challenges. We look at hardship and immediately label it as punishment. If our plans fail or our dreams seem delayed, we tell ourselves that God is angry with us or that we must have done something wrong. We forget that God's discipline is not condemnation. His guidance often comes through difficulties, through circumstances that stretch us, refine us, and prepare us for what lies ahead. Because we misinterpret these moments, we respond with fear and frustration instead of faith and understanding. Delay is another area where misinterpretation takes hold. We see a door that hasn't opened yet and declare that God has forgotten us or that he is denying us what we long for. But delay is rarely denial. Often it is preparation. God shaping the situation, aligning the timing, and preparing us for the blessing we cannot yet see. Misunderstanding this can lead to impatience, doubt, and a tendency to give up too soon. We lose sight of the bigger picture because we are too focused on what we want in the moment rather than what God has planned in eternity. Correction is another place where misinterpretation thrives. When God allows challenges, criticism, or redirection, many of us interpret it as rejection. We feel unworthy, defeated, or abandoned, forgetting that correction is an act of love. God corrects those he loves, he molds, he shapes, he strengthens. Seeing correction as rejection robs us an opportunity to grow and align with his purpose. Even the promises of God can be misread. We may hear about blessings, favor, or provision, but we misinterpret their timing or conditions. We expect instant fulfillment, and when it doesn't come, we question God's faithfulness. The problem is not with his promises, it's with our perception, our assumptions, and our impatience. This misinterpretation is subtle yet powerful. It colors every aspect of our spiritual life, our prayers, our faith, our joy, and even our relationships with others. We live under a cloud of misunderstanding, thinking God is distant or unkind, when in reality, he is speaking clearly, consistently, and lovingly. Until we learn to see these moments for what they truly are, we will continue to misread his message, react incorrectly, and miss the abundant life he has designed for us. God's message is always about love, hope, and purpose. Too often, we view life's events through a lens of fear, frustration, or doubt, and as a result, we miss the beauty and clarity of what God is actually saying. His words are never meant to destroy or confuse. They are meant to guide, uplift, and empower us to become everything He created us to be. When we misunderstand His message, we distort the way we see ourselves, our circumstances, and even the very nature of God. Life can be challenging, and we often assume that difficulties are signs of abandonment or disfavor. Yet the truth is that God's message in every trial is about preparation and growth. Every struggle, every setback, and every unexpected turn is designed to teach us something essential. It's an invitation to trust Him more deeply, to rely on His wisdom, and to align our lives with His greater plan. Misreading these moments as punishment blinds us to the lessons they contain and robs us of the opportunity to experience His transformative power. God's love is constant, unwavering, and unconditional. Even when we stumble, even when we doubt, and even when we feel unworthy, His message is one of restoration, not rejection. He calls us back, He strengthens us, and He provides for us in ways we cannot always see immediately. Misinterpreting His guidance as judgment or disfavor distorts our relationship with Him and keeps us trapped in unnecessary fear or guilt. Hope is another central theme of God's message. In a world that often seems chaotic and uncertain, His voice reminds us that there is a purpose to every season, a reason for every delay, and a plan that stretches far beyond what we can comprehend. When we misread His message, we replace hope with despair, impatience, or resentment. But when we choose to see His guidance clearly, hope becomes our anchor, sustaining us through challenges and encouraging us to persevere. Purpose is the final piece of understanding God's message correctly. Every instruction, every correction, and every word He speaks is meant to draw us closer to our destiny. Misinterpretation keeps us wandering aimlessly, chasing the wrong goals, and doubting our calling. Understanding His message for what it truly is allows us to live intentionally, walk boldly, and embrace the abundant life He has promised. Changing your perspective is essential if you want to understand God's message correctly. Too often, we interpret life through our own limited understanding, our emotions, or the pressure of circumstances, rather than seeing it through the lens of God's truth. We react to situations based on what we feel, what we see, or what we fear, and in doing so, we misread the very message God is trying to communicate. But the moment we shift our perspective, when we choose to ask different questions, when we choose to trust rather than assume, when we choose faith over fear, everything begins to change. When life seems hard, instead of asking, why is this happening to me? We can ask, what is God teaching me through this? That simple shift transforms trials into lessons, difficulties into opportunities, and pain into a pathway for growth. What once appeared as a setback can suddenly become a setup for something far greater. Every closed door, every delay, and every moment of correction can be seen not as rejection, but as preparation and love. Misinterpreting these moments keeps us trapped in discouragement, but a changed perspective opens our eyes to the hidden blessings God has placed in our path. Understanding God's message also requires us to examine the way we read His word. Too often we pick and choose verses to support our own conclusions instead of allowing the word to guide us completely. We must approach Scripture with humility, willing to be corrected, taught, and shaped. This is how perspective aligns with truth. What we see with our human eyes may feel unfair, confusing, or impossible, but when we filter life through God's lens, clarity begins to emerge. Perspective is also about timing. We often expect immediate answers, instant results, or quick resolution. When those don't appear, we misinterpret God's delay as denial or neglect. But timing is not ours to control, and God's plan unfolds in perfect order. A perspective aligned with faith allows us to wait patiently, to trust fully, and to walk confidently even when the outcome is not yet visible. By changing the way we see, the way we interpret, and the way we respond, we stop misreading God's message and start living in alignment with His plan. We begin to see the guidance, the purpose, and the love He intends for us to experience every single day. Practical steps are essential if you want to correctly interpret God's message and live in alignment with His purpose. It's one thing to understand that misinterpretation happens, but it's another to take deliberate actions that change the way you perceive His guidance. Life will continue to challenge you, doors will continue to close, and trials will continue to arise. But the way you respond determines whether you remain confused or whether you walk in clarity, peace, and purpose. One of the most important steps is learning to ask the right questions. Instead of immediately reacting with fear or frustration, Pause and ask, what is God teaching me through this situation? Or how is he shaping me right now? These questions redirect your focus from blame or doubt to growth and understanding. They train your mind and heart to look for lessons rather than obstacles and blessings rather than disappointments. Listening with intention is another critical step. Too often, we think we are hearing God's voice, but our hearts are distracted by worries, assumptions, or preconceived ideas. Intentionally seeking his guidance through prayer, meditation, and scripture allows us to filter out the noise and truly discern his message. When we approach God with humility and a willingness to be corrected, we create space for his truth to be clearly revealed. Aligning your understanding with God's truth is also key. Misinterpretation often comes from relying on human reasoning, emotions, or incomplete knowledge. The Bible reminds us that God's ways are higher than our ways, and his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. This means that to interpret his message accurately, we must measure every thought, assumption, and reaction against his word. It's not enough to assume we understand. We must actively seek to see through his perspective, trusting that he knows what is best. Finally, living with intentionality completes the process. Once you begin to see God's message clearly, act on it. Respond with faith, embrace the opportunities he provides, and make choices that reflect his guidance. Misinterpretation keeps you stagnant, but intentional action moves you forward in alignment with his plan. By consistently asking the right questions, listening intentionally, aligning your understanding with his word, and acting with purpose, you position yourself to experience God's guidance fully. These practical steps are not just actions. They are a lifestyle that transforms confusion into clarity, fear into faith, and misinterpretation into understanding. Clarity in God's words is one of the most powerful tools we can have in life, yet it is also one of the most overlooked. So many of us go through life thinking we understand what God is saying, when in reality, we are interpreting it through our own fears, assumptions, or limited perspective. Clarity comes when we stop projecting our own ideas onto his message and instead focus on hearing, understanding, and applying his truth. Once that clarity takes root, it transforms everything: our decisions, our relationships, our purpose, and even the way we respond to challenges. When we misinterpret God's words, we often live in confusion. We second guess ourselves, we doubt our direction, and we constantly worry about whether we are doing the right thing. But clarity removes the guesswork. It gives us confidence because we are no longer relying on our own understanding. We are relying on his. This kind of clarity is not vague or ambiguous. It is firm, unwavering, grounded in the principles of his word. When we see his guidance clearly, life no longer feels chaotic, and challenges no longer feel like punishments. They are simply part of the journey, part of the shaping process, and part of his plan for us. Clarity also transforms how we view the future. When we misinterpret God's words, we often live with fear of the unknown. We become anxious about what's next and unsure about what steps to take. But when we achieve clarity, we can move forward with purpose and direction. Every decision becomes an opportunity to align with his will, and every obstacle becomes a stepping stone rather than a stumbling block. Furthermore, clarity strengthens our faith. Misinterpretation breeds doubt, but understanding breeds trust. When we clearly see God's promises, his guidance, and his purpose, we are more willing to step out in faith, to take risks, and to embrace the life he has called us to live. Clarity removes confusion, replaces hesitation with confidence, and transforms uncertainty into bold action. The power of clarity cannot be overstated. It changes the way we perceive every aspect of our lives. It allows us to interpret circumstances correctly, to respond in alignment with God's truth, and to experience the fullness of his blessings. Without clarity, misinterpretation continues to rule, and we remain stuck in cycles of doubt, frustration, and fear. Misinterpretation keeps us trapped, but once we begin to see God's message clearly, everything changes. Too often, people move through life thinking they are following God's guidance, yet their steps are misaligned because they are responding to their own assumptions, fears, or incomplete understanding. The moment we correct that misreading, our whole perspective shifts. Life no longer feels like a series of random events or unfair circumstances. Instead, it becomes a purposeful journey, a path directed by God's wisdom and love. Once clarity is achieved, we begin to recognize God's hand in situations we previously misunderstood. We see that what appeared as a setback was actually a setup. What looked like rejection was actually protection, and what seemed like delay was actually preparation. Misinterpretation clouds our vision, causing us to respond in doubt, frustration, or anxiety. But when we rate God's message accurately, our hearts align with his intentions and our minds can discern his plan. We stop reacting impulsively and start responding with faith, wisdom, and confidence. Recognizing God's guidance also changes the way we approach our daily lives. Decisions that once felt overwhelming or confusing become clear and purposeful. Challenges that once seemed unbearable become opportunities for growth and demonstration of faith. Relationships that were strained can be healed because we understand the principles God has laid out for love, forgiveness, and wisdom. Misinterpretation limits our effectiveness and keeps us stuck in cycles of frustration. But clarity allows us to move forward boldly, trusting that every step is guided by divine purpose. Another powerful effect of clarity is peace. Misinterpretation breeds doubt, anxiety, and fear because we are constantly questioning whether we are on the right path. Clarity brings peace because it allows us to trust that God is in control, that his timing is perfect, and that his plan for us is good. When we no longer question his intentions or second guess his actions, we can embrace life fully, walking confidently in faith rather than stumbling in uncertainty. Finally, clarity equips us to live intentionally. Misinterpretation often leads to wasted time, missed opportunities, and frustration over what seems like unanswered prayers. But when we see God's message clearly, we can act decisively, prioritize correctly, and pursue the life he has designed for us with focus and determination. This is the freedom that comes from truly understanding God's guidance and purpose, and it is available to everyone who chooses to stop misinterpreting his message. God has been speaking to you all along, but the way you've heard him has shaped your life more than his actual words. Today, the choice is yours. Continue misinterpreting his message, or start listening with clarity, faith, and purpose. When you choose to understand his guidance correctly, every challenge becomes a lesson, every delay becomes preparation, and every moment of your life aligns with his perfect plan.